start the recording now. All right, so thank you all for joining or watching if you're watching later on YouTube. This is called Blending PBL, which is project-based learning, and UDL, which is Universal Design for Learning, to amplify student voice and empower learners. And empowering learners is really something I'm really passionate about, because if you can get your students to a point where they own their learning, that's when it becomes really powerful. Classroom environment and everything. So here's our objectives, our targets for this hour. We're going to look at what Universal Design for Learning is and what project-based learning is, and we're going to look at how you can combine those two, and they actually kind of marry together really well. It's like the most beautiful little relationship in pedagogy. Because as we start to go through it, you'll see how, oh yeah, I can do that. I can meet that UDL goal by doing this project, or I can enhance my project-based learning by using this structure of UDL. So that's kind of what we're going to be looking at today. So we're going to start by talking about Universal Design for Learning. And then, like I said, this is really about empowering students and inspiring them to own their learning. So let's get started by seeing how familiar are you with UDL? So we're going to do a waterfall response in the chat. So if you've never heard of this, where you can enter your number, but don't push send yet until I tell you to, and then everybody will enter at the same time. So it makes it more equitable if you're not looking at other people's responses, feeling pressure to put that forward if you're not comfortable with that. But how much on a scale of 1 to 4 do you know about UDL? So 1 would be like something about the universe, I don't know, design learning something. And 4 being, I'm very comfortable with it, I'm using it regularly. Yeah, so I'll give you a second to enter your numbers in the chat and send. Okay, some people are feeling like they need to send me a direct message because they don't want to admit to the world that they don't know it. That's okay. You can tell me personally, but also don't be afraid to admit that you're no idea what we're talking about, because that's why you're here. You're here to learn about this. So I applaud you for being here. Okay, so we got lots of 1s and 2s, which is great. So you're here to learn more. And we've got some 4s. 4s and some 3s, some 3 4s, 3.5s. Cool, cool. All right, that gives me a little bit of an idea. So on this slide is a rubric, but I know it's really hard to see this if you're just looking at the slides as I'm presenting them. So if you go to the bit.ly that's on the top of the yellow box there, go to bit.ly/UDL-rubric. You can go to the actual rubric and zoom in and whatnot. So this is an implementation rubric, and you can see the 3 categories here: provide multiple means of engagement, provide multiple means of representation, and provide multiple means of action and expression. So these are the 3 main categories or things to focus on. And notice that it's all about multiple means. That's really important. We're going to talk a lot about that. But on the top, you can see here you got Explorer, Novice, Intermediate, Advanced, and Idle. And I want you to keep that in mind too, because we're going to talk a lot about rubrics. I want you to keep in mind that this is not 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We're going to talk more about that later. But I would like you to take a few minutes to look at this rubric and think about, where do you think you are on the rubric and why? And what are some practices you might already use? And I'm going to add another question in there. Did you, as you were looking through this, did you see any ahas? Were there any things that when you guys were reading, like, oh, that looks really important. That was an aha moment for me. And Rob put the direct link to the rubric in the chat. So if you want to just click it there, you can. So let's take 4 minutes or so to scan through this and respond in the chat. And I'll stop talking so you can read.
Jen, the last question was, any ahas?
Yeah, any aha moments as you were scanning this? Thank you. Should I refresh the slides?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So as you're scanning through that, again, there's some questions to consider and respond in the chat if you'd like. Where do you think you are on this rubric and why? What are some practices you might already use and any ahas? So we'll take about 2 more minutes. And feel free to enter whenever your information in the chat whenever you are ready. All right, so we've got some people who have responded. Feel free to, if you haven't responded yet, feel free to respond when you're ready. I know it's a lot of information on that rubric and a lot to absorb, and it could be a little overwhelming, but take a deep breath and it's okay. You don't have to be an idle right now. You have access to that forever now. This link is not going to change or go away. So when I'm looking back, I see we have a burrito, which is not on the rubric. I'm having a burrito moment, but it sounds delicious. I see some advanced, some multiple means, provide multiple means, which is repeated, which leads me to think differentiation is an essential component of UDL. I agree. In UDL intermediate, weekly goals, daily goals, giving them more time for reflection. Okay, good. Between a novice and intermediate, still learning and practicing how to incorporate these areas in my instruction. Try to provide many resources for learning. Excellent. Pro with engagement but intermediate with representation. Okay. You work on action and expression. It can be difficult to manage. Yes, that is accurate. Totally understandable when you switch subjects. It's like you got to relearn how to do that. All right, so I appreciate your responses in the chat and kind of hearing what people are getting from this. So we're going to talk about the components of UDL. And I apologize, this was supposed to be animated, but didn't get there apparently. So we could focus on one part at a time, but I'll fix that later. So we're going to look just at number 1 right now, the goals. So for the first component, these 4 highly interrelated components comprise a universally designed equitable curriculum. And so that word equitable is really important when thinking about universal design for learning, which we're going to talk about as well in a little bit. So the first component is the goals. So students set meaningful goals about how to meet the objective or standard. So when thinking about goals in the classroom and learning goals and objectives, what about that statement under number 1, goals, sets is different than maybe what a traditional learning environment might be? You can say it or you can pop it in the chat.
That the students are setting the goal?
That the students are setting the goal, exactly. Because if I were to give, let's say I was to give Mary a goal to, I don't know, walk 5 days a week, that doesn't mean anything to Mary. But if Mary sets a goal to walk 5 days a week, that's her goal. She owns that. And that's part of that ownership that's really important when it comes to UDL. Also important is that variability part. So looking at methods, not all students need to follow the same steps or same strategies to learn the materials or complete the same assessment. And when I say assessment, I don't mean tests. We'll talk about that second. But really, when you're doing universal design for learning, the variability is the rule. It's not an exception. It's not a like, maybe this time I'll do it. There has to be different methods for them to access the materials and to show what they know. And that leads me to materials. They don't all need to have the same materials and scaffolds to reach the same objectives. This can be a little bit scary to hear. I think if you're thinking about planning, you're like, wait a second, what do I have to, I have to provide all these different things up front? Not really, we'll talk about that too. But if a student is doing a different type of project than student B, they don't need the same materials, they don't need the same scaffolds. They have different access to the information, the content, they have different processes they're going through to learn to practice the skills. And so we don't have to have the same thing. And in fact, the students should not have the same exact thing for everybody. And then assessments. And so I don't know about you guys, but if you're anything like me, when you hear the word assessment, I go like sit in the corner and twitch a little bit and maybe cry, because I just think assessments are so, like the traditional assessment like test is just such a scary and negative thing for most students, unless you're that student that can ace a test without doing anything, which is maybe 1% of our students. When you hear assessments, it's just like, oh, I just cringe so much. But if you take that test part away and you think about assessments that are more authentic and valuable and meaningful to the student and something that the student owns, they are in charge, like Mary says, they have that ownership. It becomes, now it's something they're showing you what they know, they're showing you the skills they have, they're showing you the content that they've accessed through the open opportunities that you've provided with them. And now they're like, look what I did this thing. And they're not like, oh, I gotta be on the test, cool, and that's done, right? So speaking of which, that taking away that, well, a lot of what UDL stands for, it opens up a lot of equity and justice for students. So you've all seen this, or a version of this image, where equity is that scaffolds and supports are given to support the different needs of the people here so they can all see the game. But I like the expanded version of this image, and that's the justice part, where instead of just giving scaffolding, now you're taking away the barriers, so systemic barriers that have been blocking a student from accessing that knowledge. And I would actually argue that this picture could be even better by just removing the fence completely, so that the short little person in the yellow shorts doesn't have to look through the chain link. But still, at the very least, that barrier of that solid fence has been removed, and the inequity has been addressed without even the supports, because it doesn't exist anymore, right? I like that updated picture. But UDL addresses a lot of this in the classroom by removing those barriers. So universal design for learning is all about choice and voice, giving students a choice and giving them a voice. And so we're going to talk about both of those aspects. There's some quotes here that I like, and we'll come back to these again. But I really like this quote from Andrew Miller. Voice and choice allow students to explore their passions and feel honored for their ideas and opinions. And I also like the one here, which we'll come back to, it's all about owning the entire learning process. It's not just about picking what kind of project they're going to do. It's about the whole process, and they really own that learning. Okay, I feel like I've been talking a lot. Let's take a quick 3-minute question break or less if there are questions. I feel like I'm doing the thing where you're training in like the worst possible pedagogical way. I'm just talking. You have any questions or anything you want to catch up in the chat, Rob?
So I've received a couple of questions privately in the chat, and one of them had to do with just some examples of practice with multiple means of engagement and representation. Is that coming up? Is that a segue to something that's coming up, or is this a good time to pause and talk about some examples?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that, Rob?
Some examples. So a couple questions that I got related to some examples for multiple means of engagement or multiple means of representation.
Okay, we'll talk a little bit about that. I will be completely transparent with you. I really want to put more examples and resources for you in this slide deck that I just haven't done yet. But if you hold on to this link from tonight, as I update it, I will be updating the slides and adding links too. I really want to get more real world examples embedded into these. It's just I haven't gotten there yet. So if you do, speaking of which, happen to have awesome examples and you want to share with me that I can share with others, that would be great too. Any other questions?
No, but both of the questions that I received privately had to do with examples.
Okay, perfect. All right, so let's talk about choice and voice a little bit more. And And also there's this continuum of voice picture here, which is very small in the slides, but it is a link to the larger picture if you want to take a look at that. So choice is where students can celebrate their skills and passions while accessing content. So we've probably all heard of choice boards. They've been a big buzzword, especially during distance learning, where students get a variety of options on how to access the learning and show what they know. There's a lot of templates on slidesmania.com for choice boards, and there's a few more links here for examples of choice boards. And so the nice thing about choice boards is it's like, if you use it like HyperDoc, it's one document. They have choices for how they can complete the learning objectives. But in addition to that, students should also have a voice in how they're going to learn and what they're going to do. And so voice increases students' level of ownership in their learning, and this is where it becomes really powerful. So some examples of that would be collaborative designing projects, or units, or even rubrics. Getting information, feedback from students about the classroom and how they want to go about learning, how they like how the classroom culture is, and what, or anything that they can contribute their opinions to the classroom and how the classroom is run. But you can't just give them a survey and then not just listen to their requests, right? Unless they're requesting for a bag of M&Ms every day. If it's reasonable, you should try to accommodate so that they understand that their voice is being heard and they have that power to make their learning the best that it can be. And then self-reflections are also really important because it gives them a chance to kind of to think about it, and how did they do, how can they improve it, and those self-reflections should also lead to iterations, which are a very important part of project-based learning and universal design for learning. All right, so let's talk about rubrics. Rubrics are essential when doing this kind of work. And the right kind of rubric. So it's not just, points and like you have to do X, Y, Z, but it is, sorry, why is my slide not going? There we go. So project-based learning, students must know what is expected. If you give a student a project and they have all these objectives to meet, they have to know how to meet those objectives. Otherwise, it's completely unjust and inequitable, right? And we're aiming for that equity and justice piece. So they really need to know what's expected. Voice and choice needs to be embedded in that rubric, which we're going to talk a little bit more in depth in the next couple of slides. So that means that there's choice on how they're going to access and show what they know. And there's also their voice embedded in the rubric. And that can be where it's really powerful. The rubrics give the transparency, and they address that equity and justice piece, like I said. All right, so rubrics that support UDL. And this is where I find that when I talk about UDL, I get really excited about the ideas and this, but the fear factor comes in with teachers like, wait, I have to do how many things at once before I even start this unit or project with the students? Does that mean that I have to have a rubric for every single choice that the students may want to do? So like if I'm doing one project, but there's like all these different ideas, do I have to have 100 different rubrics for that project? Absolutely not. That sounds terrible. Nobody's going to do that. That sounds completely awful. Please don't make 100 rubrics. Make one rubric that is descriptive and criterion based instead of using points, and focuses on what skills they're practicing, what content they're accessing, and how that they are demonstrating their knowledge of both of those things. So like if let's say I'm a science teacher, so I always come back to like science, and I'm part of Monterey Bay Q, and we have this film festival that's focused on conservation topics. So I always come back to this because it's just the first thing in my head. But let's say you're doing a project where they are learning about human impact and conservation, and so you want them to learn about these things. You want them to show what they've learned. So maybe they make a website, maybe they make a video, maybe they make a poster campaign, not just a poster, but a campaign, because part of project-based learning is that it's not just, it goes beyond the classroom, which we'll talk about. Do you have to make a rubric for all 3 of those different things, or however many options they have? No. But if they meet all of the requirements for the project, who cares how they do it, right? It's all about the process. It's not about, and the learning, it's not about what vehicle they're taking. I have means for that later. Also, by using descriptive criterion-based rubrics instead of points, you're taking away that like bean counting culture and competition in the classroom, where it's like, I have to do this to get 5 points, but instead it's, I have to do 5, do that. I want to do this because I want to be an idol, or I want to be an advanced, or, you know, that descriptive part. And not because I want to get points, but because I want to do well. And then it kind of just changes that viewpoint, in even if it's just something small like that. Also making, if they have the opportunity to self-reflect and iterate and change and improve, then it becomes less about the competition and the endpoint. Like, I got a B on this project and I'm done. Now it's, I got advanced on this project, but if I did this little extra thing, I could be an idol. And wouldn't that be great? And that'd be so easy to do. And it's transparent, and it's not about those 5 points and end game. So I heard about this idea of creating a rubric where you collaborate with the students and the students and teachers work together to create a rubric. And I just think it's like the coolest idea. And think of how powerful it could be if you present this idea of the project to students and said, what do you think that would look like? What do you think that a good piece of work was? And then they're starting to think more about it. And now they're thinking, oh, if I did this, that would be really good. But I think if I did this, it would be like taking the easy way out. So that'd probably be meh. And do you have to, but how do you do that, right? Do you have to, and traditionally it's always been the rubrics are presented at the beginning of the project, and it's done and it's set, and doesn't change, and the students conform to the rubric. But what if the rubric was a living thing, and the students were looked at exemplars and non-exemplars and thought really deeply about what makes a good final product? And now they're like, it's like internalizing what good work and good learning is, instead of just being given it, right? And that's part of that ownership. So who says a project has to be, or a rubric has to be done right away? What if as you're going, you find that the rubric doesn't work and you got to change it? So you get the student input, maybe in a survey, maybe in conversation, and you change it in the middle. As long as you're transparent and the kids have a voice, the students have a voice in that process, that's okay. They know that you want them to do best. They know that you want them to learn the most. And why not, right? Like, throw all those old traditional rules out. Let's flip the script here. So I talked a lot about student collaborative rubrics already, but I just think it's such an exciting idea. And I think it could really change this, the process of how students are assessing and self-assessing and peer reviewing and all of that. So again, this could be a formative process along the way. And I also think that if students are working together to look at these exemplars and examining what is good work and what is the key information, that is a natural discussion builder. So now they're having conversations with their peers, and they're comparing and contrasting, and maybe they're disagreeing and having, well, constructive arguments about what they need to do. Now they're really, really internalizing that process because they're talking about it and they own it. Like, I just think it could be so powerful. And the other thing is, I think it's easy to forget that students hold themselves to really high standards. We all know we're our own worst enemy, and it's not different for students at all. you know, how often have you had a kid turn in a piece of work and like, well, I did my best, but I don't think it's that great. And you're like, this is like amazing. And I'm totally going to give like this totally earns an A, right? And they're like, what? You know, because they hold themselves to such high standards. So if they build those high standards into the rubric, now you've got extended rigor and you're just making all the admin happy, but that's not as important as the kids getting that real true learning and ownership. Okay, I get so excited about this. So I know that I'm not going to cover all of this in the hour, but you have the slides available, and I will get to as much as I can. And I will keep adding to it as I refine and get more examples and resources as well. Okay. So just some more thoughts about rubrics. I think that they are that transparency is really an equalizer. It removes that emotional part of the grade and that implicit and complicit biases that we have, even though we tried not to. And it also promotes a growth mindset of this is about, it's not a final grade. Maybe it's not yet there, but it's going to be, because I can change it and I can do better and I can revise and I can have that redemption versus just bean counting, right? Okay, I gotta calm down. And I already talked about promoting self-reflection and skills. I feel like I covered most of this. I have a couple of resources here about you for UDL, but there's more coming soon, so please check back. And if you want to email me and ask questions, you are more than welcome to. I will share anything I have. Okay. That's in the wrong spot. Okay, so let's talk about project-based learning. So before I move on to that, I know we have 20 minutes left and a lot to cover, but I want to take a moment to breathe first of all and answer any questions that you might have. So let's take a quick question and answer break. Is there any questions that I might have missed in the chat?
So I wasn't messaged this time in between this time and the last time.
Yeah, I don't see any. Any questions from our attendees? Just soaking it up. Soak it up, girl.
I think we're soaking it up.
Love it. All right.
Of resources, I have a question for you, Jen.
Yeah.
Is there one particular resource that you've provided a lot of great resources so far? Is there one particular one that really stands out to you? Like I can see one from cast.org.
That's a good question, Rob. Go back. So at the top of my head, I clearly wasn't prepared for that question.
Oh, no,
at the top of my head, I would have to, you know, I feel like that question needs its due course. So let me think about it and And if anybody has any resources they want to share, please feel free to drop those in the chat as well.
All right, got it. Thank you.
All right. So let's talk about project-based learning. And again, if any have any questions that you want to pop in the chat, please do. So why should we be doing project-based learning? Okay, so again, we're going to do a waterfall response on a scale of 1 to 4. How much do you know about project-based learning? So put your number in, but don't click send yet. So 1 would be something about projects. What? And 4 would be I'm really comfortable with it. I do it as much as I can, and I try to teach others. All right, give you a second to put your number in the chat. Okay, send. Get some. Okay, lots of 3s and 2s. 3.5. Okay, cool. All right, so kind of a mid-ground. We got some a little higher, some a little less, and that is totally great. So So let's talk about this. So project-based learning is not just projects. So I'm going to start here and go backwards. Projects are something that is scripted by the teacher. Give the criteria is pre-planned and clear. It's given to the students. They have directions and criteria. It's set, right? And it's turned, when they're done, they turn it into the teacher, and maybe their classmates see it and maybe they don't. But then that's kind of where it ends, right? So you know, you made a poster and you did well and you turned it in and you're proud of it. But then what? Right? But project-based learning is where you go beyond that. So it's more of an organic, open-ended process, which is why it ties so well into universal design for learning, because all of those things I just talked about, you know, being open and bringing in the student voice and choice into that leads it to being much more organic, open-ended. It's based on a purpose or an inquiry. It's focused on a question or a purpose. The student is assuming an authentic role. It's not just about making this thing to the teacher's criteria. It's now about creating something that is real and going beyond the classroom. So, you know, if you make a video, you're sharing it beyond the classroom by maybe submitting it to the Monterey Film Festival, Student Powered Film Festival. Maybe it's a website and they are now posting it out everywhere on social media. But it goes beyond the classroom and beyond the teachers just grading it and then giving it back. Now it's spreading the word, of sharing their knowledge with others. And that's what the power behind project-based learning. So it becomes a community process. So it is student-driven. It's personal, meaningful project selection and presentation from the student's choice and their student voice. And one of the times I've presented this, somebody mentioned bringing the student culture into this part of it. And I thought that was really powerful, because the more they put of themselves into their learning, the more powerful their learning is going to be. So if you have a student from Japan and they're doing something on environmental impact, but they just had a nuclear power plant problem 10 years ago. God, has that been that long ago? So now maybe that they're bringing their home country into the project that they're learning about, and they're going deeper into that research. And now that learning is meaningful to them, right? Maybe they're from, where is it? I'm trying to think of where all the volcanoes are. Is it Chile, the one that goes down the coast? Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they're learning about volcanoes and plate tectonics, and they're from a country that has a lot of volcanoes, and there was just a volcano erupted, and like maybe when they lived there and they had, you know, so, or maybe their relatives live there, whatever it is, but they're bringing part of their culture now into that learning, and that becomes much more valuable to them. The teacher now becomes more of a facilitator that is asking questions, providing guidance, prompting and cueing, guiding them along the process of learning, and giving and saying that, giving feedback, that looks great, how can you make it better, and just facilitating the entire process, versus standing up in the front of the classroom, the students are taking notes while you're lecturing. It's just the students don't own that process. You can integrate all the curriculums into one single project, which we're going to talk more about. And it also is very naturally leads to teamwork and collaboration, because they're usually working together to solve the problem or answer the questions. Okay, so key components of project-based learning. The projects are focused on a question or a problem. That's the driving force. That's where that guides the whole process. So they're trying to answer a question, solve a problem, a real world situation, and how can they learn about this and answer this question or solve this problem through the project. It has a goal. That's the goal, right? Again, rubrics are a key component here. Which we talked a lot about already, but you can see if rubrics are a key component of project-based learning and UDL, you see the connection here. Connection to students, it's meaningful, It's interesting to them. Again, another component of UDL. Iterations, it's imperative that they can change and improve through self-reflection and feedback and peer reviews, that they can improve that. And again, that promotes that culture of I can do better. Not yet. It's not the end game when you get your grade or your place on the rubric. It's okay. I'm here, but I want to go there. Okay, I'm here, but I can go there, right? And I know what I need to do. And then inquiry or showcase, providing a way for them to showcase what they know, again, beyond just the classroom. So there are some examples here, which I'll talk just about a couple of them. I've already kind of brought up the Student Powered Film Festival a lot, but you could see how a video project about conservation, how the power behind that. And so we do have our Student Powered Film Festival, which you can learn more about on our website, mbq.com. But again, now that student is, they made this video, but they can put it on YouTube. They put it in film festivals, they can share it on social media, and now that message that they learned all about is going beyond the classroom. I want to talk about combining. I'm going to go back to this slide here, and as I'm talking, if you want to share other ideas for project-based learning in the chat, but I want to talk about the standards, because they're like, the common thing I hear is I have this pacing guide and I have to cover all of these things and I only have like a week to do this and a week to do that. Okay, calm down on the pacing guide and let's focus on what is the most important things that we're trying to learn, right? And how can I take what my students need to learn in my standards, but then collaborate maybe with other departments or cover many standards in one project. Even if I'm not, maybe you do collaborate, maybe you do it on your own, but you can cover so many topics in one project. And it's really, you can see the value of this in elementary school where you have to cover one teacher's covering lots of topics. Let's take a look at some of these examples and think about how is English, reading, all the ELA stuff, the creativity, the math, and the contents combined in these examples. So if, let's say the project was to plan, design, and make a school garden. Okay, that sounds like a nice idea, but going beyond just oh, I want to make a garden, let's think about all the things that could go into the process of making a garden at your school. So they have to plan it, which means they have to do some research. What grows well in this area? What's native and non-native? So now we're learning about the biology and the ecology of their home space. They have to design. So we've got math, we've got measurements, we've got some geometry and some spatial design. We've, you know, that they have to think about how much space is each plant going to need, and they have to plan that out. So there's math and measurements. They have to research what kind of plants are going to grow there, but then they also have to think about all of the supplies that are going to go into that. Now they have to think about a budget. They're doing math, they're budgeting, which is a real world thing that we all have to do, some better than others. And they have to, so they're reading and learning and all this stuff, they're doing their research, they're doing math. And let's say you can't just go dig up a plot in your school, right? You have to get permission. So now they have to write a letter to the school board or to the principal saying why that they should, there's been people in the waiting room, just FYI, why they should plant this garden. What's the purpose of it? What's the value to the school? So now they're practicing their ELAs, they're writing, they're you know, they're thinking about the whole process. So you're getting all of those contents mixed in there, and even like social sciences and civics, because how is the garden going to improve the school environment and the school culture, right? So you can cover so many things with just one project, and the more you think about it and dig deep into the project, the more you're going to see that. Okay, deep breath. So let's bring all the contents together, but also what if we work together and we make this a school-wide or just a grade-wide thing, or even just the closest math teacher to your room. When you when you make a project that goes across many subjects, you're decreasing the work that one teacher is doing. Yeah, it takes a little bit of pre-planning, but once you get it going, you're a facilitator. You're not doing the hard work every single day. You're facilitating, and the students are doing the hard work by owning that learning. And they don't even know because they're just doing it. They don't know they're the ones doing the hard work now. So, okay. All right, so I know I'm running out of time. This is what happens because I get excited about this stuff and then I run out of time. Okay, so I'm using this as a verb here. How do you UDL your PBL? And that is with the choice and the voice. So all those stuff we talked about with universal design for learning, you can see how it naturally wraps around project-based learning. And project-based learning naturally wraps itself around universal design for learning. It's like they were meant to be. So by embedding choice into the project, they have many options, not just on the final product, but how they're going to show what they know, what they're going to produce, but also how they're going to access the content. If a textbook doesn't work for some students on how to access the content, who says they can't watch a video about it and learn about it through a video, and then maybe read an article that got practice reading. But why not? Who says we can only get the information from one source? They do some research, they learn about what a reliable source is, and if they can prove that that source is reliable, why can't they use it, right? But you got to front load the how to get to a reliable resource first, because we know the web is covered with junk. So the process on how students get to that final product, that's a choice too. So how are they going to access the content? How are they going, what materials do they need? All those things that we talked about, the variations, the differentiations is embedded in how they're going to do their project. Voice. So if students have input on the rubric, on the subject matter, and that's the subject matter is, never mind, I don't know what I was getting at with my parentheses there. I'll skip that part. So if students have input on, oh, I know what I was thinking. So they have input on the rubric, they have input on the subject matter, but not the content skills. Like, you know that as a teacher, you know these are your essential skills, your essential content that they have to learn. So but the subject matter, as far as like, so let's say they have to practice writing a persuasive essay, an argumentative essay, persuasive essay. Obviously, I'm not an English teacher. I don't know the proper term for that. It's not about the subject matter, maybe, but it's about that content, the skills, and then the writing part. But the subject matter is where they get to have that choice and voice as to what they're going to write their essay about. And I know we all, as teachers, we're always like, wait, I don't know if I want them to choose their own partners because they don't always choose well, but they won't. Usually, if they choose wrong the first time and it doesn't work out, they're going to not choose that way again. If they choose their best friend and they just, mess around, they don't get to do well, the next time they're probably not going to want to work with their best friend anymore. But having a voice in that grouping, and obviously, within reason. So just remember what method of transportation that the student uses is less important than the journey. So if you're driving, if the journey is to travel across the country, you could do it in a moped, a car, a train, a plane. What's more important is that the journey is being taken and the learning is happening. So it's also a journey for the teacher. So do you love that journey for you? Are you with Alexis here? 1 to 4 in the chat. We don't have to waterfall at this time, but 1 is like, no, this journey is not for me, or heck yes, love that journey for me. Where's my Schitt's Creek fans at? So go ahead and answer in the chat. Are you with Alexis here? Are you, did I sell you on this yet? Mary's in, heck yes. Francesca's in, Francisca? Sorry if I pronounced it wrong. And it's okay if you're a 2 or a 3, hopefully you're not a 1. Meant for my whole school. Yes, I love that, Jennifer. Awesome, awesome, awesome. I'm so excited.
Hey, Jen, we had a pretty good dialogue getting going in the chat. So as everybody's responding to that, we had a pretty good question pop up about scaffolding PBL to students and getting them to, making the transition from you know, like worksheets and that kind of thing. Do you have any advice in regards to that?
Yeah, just I would say, remember that it's not going to be perfect the first time, and it's probably not going to be perfect the fifth time, and give yourself that grace to mess up, but also be upfront with the students like, hey, we're going to try this, and I think it's going to be really great, but I'm going to need your help to prove, and it's, you know, we're going to finesse it together. The kids are going to understand. They're going to support. They're going to be, hopefully they'd be excited about, you know, doing something different. I would say it starts small, take baby steps. You don't have to jump into to all the idle stuff right away on that rubric. That's not reasonable. So if you go back to that rubric and you're like, what stuck out to you the most? What do you think would be the most important thing? And start there, right? So if that, let's go back to the slide. Does that answer the questions?
Yeah, I like the point about starting small and working into it. And I also think, you know, I think you were also alluding to the fact that you can also scaffold the process into project-based learning, right? So the individual that wrote the question, which I think, by the way, is a great question, is worthy of a whole discussion all on its own. Is and I mean, you can use sentence frames if your sentence frames are portable, you know, and they can extend across multiple domains or multiple subjects. I think that, you know, you can, that be an example of scaffolding the process to get students to do some kind of, you know, verbal perhaps or written project. So well done, Jen, and good strong points. Thank you.
If I could just say too, when it comes to group work, and I do recognize that sometimes you do have those really shy kids, or the ones that just absolutely are afraid to say anything or contribute anything. I think sometimes one of the biggest resources is the other kids themselves, their peers, putting them in a group that they're comfortable with, having a private conversation with that group. And I think that there's a lot that they can get from their peers as far as getting that that ability to take academic risk and not feel foolish.
Absolutely. And that's part of that culture that you need to make in your classroom in order for this stuff to work. Thank you so much for saying that. I want to say your name, but I don't want to mispronounce it. So. Thank you so much.
Eloina. It's okay.
Eloina. That's beautiful. Thank you for making sure I didn't mispronounce it. That's a beautiful name. Thank you for making that point, Eloina, because it's really essential that you develop your classroom culture as a place that is safe and that they can take those academic risks so that they can jump into this and feel like comfortable about it. And part of that is explaining to the students up front, being very clear, like, it's okay if we don't do this perfect first time because we're going to be able to fix it. And that's where that
could be your first project. How do we help students who are terribly shy work in, you know, a group, and then have them come up with samples or solutions?
Yeah, definitely. And also making, you know, observing those children, who are they most comfortable with, and grouping them together too. Thank you.
Yeah, well said. Well said.
So I'm going to put this last slide up. We're in a couple minutes past 6, but thank you so much for sticking with me. Again, this is my own personal feedback form, completely anonymous. It is just so that you can help me be better, because we're always trying to be better, right? So if you have any feedback, I would super duper appreciate it. I'm going to go ahead and stop recording so that we can have a moment to ask questions without worrying about being recorded. But though, for those of you watching after the fact, thank you for watching, and please subscribe to the Modern Day YouTube channel. Okay, this is why I'm not a YouTuber. Stop recording.